Uh, we've um, we've got 58 people registered that are actually looking at the webinar either live like this or recording afterwards. So that's pretty great to be reaching so many people. It's very satisfying. I don't have much to say at all this week, but except for a reminder that there's an actual practical workshop on Friday here at Franklin, looking at similar to what we're talking about here, but we're actually going to be doing the practical exercise of biological monitoring, which is a short version, which is used as a management tool, and also the landscape function analysis, which is a scientific data collection process. So yeah, so Kelly's coming along and Jordan. Um, and there's going to be a whole swathe of uni students as well. They bring your bus load down, so that's great. So that's all from me. Over to you, Graham.
Great. Thanks, Celia. I'll just click this and click go, and we'll kick into it. Well, welcome everyone to another week of the creating and monitoring functional landscapes. So um, it's based on the Tasman Farm Innovation Hub for drought resilience. So we're working all around the state. I've been to all corners of the state, it feels like today. Over to see Rob at where was that, Smithton, and I'm back in Devonport and heading south tomorrow. Um, yeah, jump in at any stage. I'm always really happy to take any questions. So I use this as a definition because it's sort of a triple bottom line and it's auditable, or you can actually scientifically measure each of these three rings. I believe that money and people are nested in increasing land health. So increasing biodiversity through increasing landscape function. So a lot of the definitions have one part, usually a lot of land stuff, but I think it's also important that we put well-being scores in, which is being done by, I've forgotten her name again, but it's through Australian National University each year. And then that money is stable or increasing in profit, not production. I've updated this graph. This was done 23rd of the 1st. It sort of, and the data sort of dropped just at the start of January this year. And they've just updated it. And which I really like is that they've gone for a longer forecast. They always went out 3 or 4 years, but it's, it won't be accurate, but it's usually um, plus or minus about $3 to $5 billion for both gross farm and net farm on their forecast. So for that 4,800 million, whatever that's 4.8 billion there, they had forecasted be 1.7 and it came in at 4.8, or that's their latest estimate of it. The highs were back here, 20,000 and then 94,000. And then it's sort of bouncing along. The gross farm's not in that, keeping on going up, but the net's always pretty stable. It's quite rare for it to bust $10 billion. So the gross sort of increases, the net stays always pretty flat. I then had to think about that and I started looking at what's the ratio between the net and the gross, and it sort of bounces around. I haven't had a chance to go back and check this, but generally, this one looks like a bit of an aberration. This sort of high number here, I'll just grab my pointer, this high number here. This run through here is usually during tough years when people tighten their belt, they actually usually keep more of the gross. So the higher this peaks are, the more the farmers are keeping more of their gross. And during droughts and tough years, there tends to be a phase shift between, the tighter the year, the next year they keep more money, and then they spend it the year after. So there's always this up and down effect, sort of farmers reacting and trying to spend their income like we all do. So I always used to tell people that, the more I got paid, the more I learned to spend, and we've got to learn to save a bit more of it. Just quickly, landscape function. If you want the land to be stable or not eroding, to infiltrate water and to cycle nutrients, these are the big things. So it's got to be covered. It's got to have a high percentage, well, about 30% of the ground has got to be covered with the bases of mature perennial grasses. This is what number 2 is talking about. And we're talking about mature perennial grasses being 2 centimetres by 2 centimetres where they meet the ground. If you can stride from one perennial grass to another, it's really quick to regenerate. If you can short step from one perennial grass to another, then it's usually about 20 to 30%. Once it gets over that, it's very hard to find a gap to put your foot in. And at 50 to 60% basal cover of perennial grass, you almost have to turn your foot on its side to step between the perennial grasses. So very easy to regenerate with a stride. Normal step is about 20%. Starting to find it hard to find a gap to put your foot's about 50 to 60%. If you don't want to go to the trouble of measuring it. But they've got to be pretty big grasses. Most properties have got grasses that are too small at that basal area. So where they actually, if that's the soil surface, you're measuring that and you're grabbing it and squeezing it at the soil surface. Then we need litter cover, and it needs to be decomposing. Slight decompositions when it's changing cover. Moderate decomposition is when you have visible fungal attack, and I've got one of those coming up. And surface roughness, you want it to be between around about 8 millimeters over a meter from the highest point to the lowest point. And I'll be talking more about this as we go. But you sort of want it covered 100% of the ground 100% of the time, and that's a combination of basal cover of perennial grasses and litter. And annual plants, and then the litter's decomposing, and that's from the perennial grasses. And then you want the crowns of the grasses to be providing the surface roughness, not necessarily pugging. So just quickly, recovery impacts all of this.
Sorry, Graham, can I ask one question on the perennial grasses?
Yeah, sure.
Are you agnostic as to whether they're native or introduced, or?
Yeah, I ran Stipa native grasses. I can't see who's speaking. Sorry.
Sorry, it's Luke Simmons here.
Oh, Luke. Yeah, I ran Stipa native grasses, the Australian Native Grass Association, for quite a long time. And I'd like to say it's important that they were natives, but what I found that the soil and the wildlife really didn't care, which wasn't what I thought I was going to find. So, we had in paddocks that were all introduced grasses that were functioning well, with decomposing litter, and the litter's going well, and the perennials are going well, and there's lots of cover. The quail, everything didn't care. So I am agnostic, and I thought that because I thought it'd be a great selling point for the native grasses. I think we need the native grasses in a combination with the introduced grasses. The interesting thing for me was that the introduced native grasses that typically we would say didn't have an association with mycorrhizal fungi and had been selected for fertilizer to perform properly and things, they would switch and become mycorrhizal, so that they really didn't need the high levels of phosphorus and things in the soil. They learnt to sort of access it. And when I thought about that, I thought, well, that makes sense, because they would have come from somewhere that they would have had to have looked after themselves. There's a lot of the breeding and things like that. So a lot of the grasses that in set stocking they select for persistence generally weren't very palatable when they were mature enough to increase landscape function. So a perennial grass is ready to be grazed when it looks like an ungrazed plant. All the grasses have got their tips back. All the plants that were chewed off previously are now in the litter in the plants, and they're ready to be grazed again. And there's enough litter that if you did graze all the green out, I'm not saying that you do, but you graze most of the green out, and then the litter is pushed on, you've got 100% ground cover. So yeah, so it really didn't matter. And yeah, like, and sort of, I'm finding the same with paspalum, with phalaris, with cocksfoot and things like that. So yeah, as long as you work on, the first thing is to get it perennial. So Colin Seiss regenerated his soil near Mudgee there with Bothria cloa, red leg grass or red grass. And that was what he used, and I used phalaris in southwest Victoria. But then once we got better at managing and we got more landscape function, then it filled in. But I found with the phalaris, I had to graze it very hard, very infrequently to get the other species in. So we got perennial ryegrass, weeping grass, wallaby grass. I can see it, I can't think of it. Yeah, so that sort of management. Yeah, so just quickly, I'll skip on with this sort of the relationship between how we graze it and the change in the soil surface is the key. We have to actively manage to get that litter to decompose. You've got to grow enough litter, you've got to press it onto the soil surface, and then you've got to leave it long enough to decompose. So recovery is really important. So you get more plants grown, so more soil cover. You get bigger basal areas on the perennial grasses. You grow more litter. The litter becomes more complex, and more of it is starting to process by the life in the soil, and the crowns are increasing, so you get surface roughness. If you have long recoveries, you've got to have high stock density to keep that all turning over. So you need the feet pushing the litter down, stimulating the crowns, doing all that. And you've also got to have high utilization. So utilization is how far you graze it down. So I disagree with 95% of all the grazing trainers that are talking about 50% utilization. Our grazers throughout the world that were ran in the big grasslands and domestic grazers, they all are not nibblers. They graze down hard. You've got to graze a lot of the plants off and leave the ground covered. So I've got a lot of research showing that the 50%, take half, leave half, and all that doesn't work as well as going slower and eating it down further. I'm also not a fan, and Rob caught me up on this today, that I'm not a fan of necessarily planting things. I just believe that we can do this just by germinating and establishing the perennial grass seed bank. And then if you're short of a few perennial grasses, if you can't get to that 30 perennial grasses, you might broadcast some. So, but yeah, and then if you didn't broadcast, you'd work, maybe overseeding. I'm a great believer in what's the lowest cost, lowest risk thing you can do. And then if that doesn't work, you escalate to the next level. If that doesn't work, you escalate again. And the problem we have is that, I was going to give men a kicking. I always feel like I can give men a kicking because I think I am one. Is that we want to do the last thing that we saw or heard. So if it's got a fancy machine or a technique or something you can add, we like to jump to there. And I'm saying, no, do the right things, just the grazing, then just the grazing plus, an escalate as you go, so that you're always keeping it low cost, low risk. I was just going to run through some of this about getting animal performance. The biggest issue that we have with, well, one of the big issues that we have with switching to grazing to increase landscape function is animal performance. So this is the body condition scoring system, where we're trying to keep them at least 3 all the time. So at the moment, our cows are between 3s and 4s, and the calves are all what you would call 4s generally. There's a few that sort of, like are going to struggle, and their mums probably won't last in the herd. But we're trying to keep them here. So ribs generally not visible. I don't know. Can you see if Spikey's on, Lawrence? Yeah, I can see. It's a big list. I can't see everyone. Hey, Jordan. So we're trying to keep them looking like that. So the unadapted genetics that we've got, so we've brought in sort of probably 80 or 90 cows, heifers. They're starting to look between here and here. They're hard to keep here. We've definitely got one cow that's in this body condition score 2. And like the others, and my adapted genetics that are, the cows are sort of 12, 15 years old, they're all 4s. So when they can hardly walk, they've got that much grass in them, but they eat for a living. They know how to look after themselves. When they go into a paddock, they just are into it. They don't dawdle. They don't wait to feed their calf and then come in when I've shifted them into a new area. They tell the calf, you've got to come with me. We're going to eat. So I like to think of it as they really know how to work. So we're trying to keep them 3+, and it's hard to do on recovered grass and with different genetics. But if they don't fit, we usually have to move them on, because otherwise you end up managing for these ones that are poor and unsuited for what we need. So having said that, Spikey, this is sort of, I was just going to go through your cows. Do you still want me to do that? Is that all right? Okay. So I really like this. This is good dry, electric fencing, real summer look. Sort of know it really well. And the first photo I saw was these ones. So we check and use the gut fill on the left-hand side of the cows. So that one's a little bit low, just sort of struggling, so I say we're trying to keep them 4 all the time. So there's 2 things. There's how fat they are and how much grass they've got in their ruminants. And we're trying to keep those ruminants at 4 if they're only on fully recovered grass. If they're getting other supplements, grain or silage or whatever, you can get away with lower. But if they're on recovered grass, you've got to try and keep them at gut fill 4, so smooth straight through. So the bull's straight through. This one's got body condition 3. That one's body condition 3+, maybe 4 from what I can see. This one here, it's got lower gut fill. You can't see the ribs, so maybe a 3. So just quickly looking at them, that one looks like a 4. That's probably body condition 3. You've got to make sure that they're drinking well. All this gut fill scoring relies on that they've got really good water that they take 70 glugs of. So when they go up, they drink and drink deeply. You've got to really check that the water's right. So when you're doing this fully recovered grass, you don't want them sniffling and snuffling and playing with it and doing all those sort of things. If they're thirsty, they go up and they drink it like we drink rainwater rather than chlorinated water. So really watching those sort of things all the time. You can see the ribs here. So this is probably 2.5. This one's sort of going really well, shiny, gut fill, at least the body condition 3. This one's body condition 2. See the ribs sort of not going so well. Always looks skinny. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Sort of, you can see these points. It's sort of quite hard, and the ribs, and some just will not suit because they've been selected to be grown with hay and silage or finished on grain for feedlots. There's a lot of the genetics out there that just will not fit, and you've got to sort through them as they go. What we've been trying to do is these cows that don't fit is to join them to bulls that their calves will fit the next generation. So, you know, good body condition, good gut fill, looking good. Yeah, so it's that sort of, I get rid of anything with one testicle. We we'd get it in and check it, see if it did have a testicle, and then either castrate it or get rid of it. So it sort of hangs at the back and quiet's interesting, sort of. It may or may not have another testicle, so we just reach under and get it, or sell it. So the I can remember our livestock buyer at the abattoir when I worked at the abattoir thing. He'd say, "Oh, it's a stag." He doesn't want to go on the. He doesn't want it to go on the grid as a bull, and because it only had one testicle. And I said, "It goes on the grid as a bull. It's either a bull or it's not. There is no." And it had all the secondary sexual characteristics and stuff. So, yeah, and I just go through them, give them scores. We try to score them at calving and then when the bulls go out or at marking. So we select cows, and this is considered to be sort of like a sort of against nature or something over in Southwest Victoria. So we wanted them to put on weight from calving to joining. So, and because we were calving into the autumn break, you know, we were calving in April, and it was close usually to the autumn break. They would put on weight coming up to joining because we wanted them on a rising plane of nutrition before the bulls went out. And most people thought that was impossible, but you can select for it. Most of the livestock, the sheep and cows, have got too much milk, and they've been selected for too much milk. And most people would say, "Oh, you've got to make sure that you've got them in good condition at calving." Well, we would do that. We would make sure that we selected for not too much milk and ability to put on weight quickly. So, sorry, lost my train of thought.
There was just a question, Graham, about why looking at the left side for the gut fill.
Well, they're not symmetrical. So when they're in calf, they can look like they're going okay for gut fill, but it's actually that for some reason the calf, I'd have to look at the anatomy again. So the left-hand side was the closest side I always found, and was the most consistent. So you can get a bit of an idea from both sides, and I use it. But if I want to confirm, I always go to the left side because that's sort of what I use for those photo standards. If 3 is sort of slightly dipped and pressed in, and 4 it was straight through, and 5 was convex, sort of a proud, sitting proud. So yeah, so really just that sort of it was usually just that side that I used. So and then I really like this photo of the current feed, and it's sort of as a classic of why if you don't graze quickly in the spring, because if you graze slowly in the spring and make them chew it out, you end up with this sheltered, so dry matter over clover or over other green material underneath. So the canopies close. When the canopy closes, you get a little mini water cycle under there, and the plants get a lot of, if you've got decomposing litter, they're getting CO2 straight into their stomata, and they'll stay green under there. if you graze quickly and go around the farm quickly in spring, you'll break that canopy and let all that moisture out, and you don't retain any of the green feed that you need to get enough protein to harvest a lot of this dry feed. So you need a combination all the time of this green and dry feed. So we try and grow like that all the time. So that sort of looks pretty good. A little bit towards the drier side, which fits, Spiky, with your thing. So a really good dung is when it looks like a pie with a dip in the middle. Then as it starts to get onto drier feed, you always get excellent animal health, but you start to get lower performance. But that's perfect. Sort of, you wouldn't worry about that. And the biggest worry is when you get down to liquid manure, which is showing that they've got too much blood urea nitrogen and the grass is too young, and they end up with diarrhea and they can't keep any nutrients in their body. It causes metabolic diseases. So young grass is a danger. It does tend to be a bit like rocket fuel. They can grow pretty quick if it's just too wet. So a nice pie with a dip in the middle is the optimum for animal health and for animal performance. So I started thinking about horses and stuff and how sort of they should smell sweet. They should smell good. Not that ammonia dung smell. They should be more like a silagey, tobacco-y sort of smell. Not many people have been in a tobacco factory nowadays, but yeah, you know what I mean, sort of more that silagey smell when they're going well. Good ground cover, yeah, and sort of, you know, the perennials will come. If you've got enough stock density, the perennials will come. Yeah, so that cow, I wouldn't worry about it. It's just going to be that sort of, as long as she's getting access, not getting bullied, that's just as they've got to have a high ability to harvest feed and a strong appetite and stuff. If they're not going to fit, then they have to move on. So usually if they've got clean tails, they're not suffering from worms, it's more to do with their breeding, and there's not much you can do about it. So yeah, so as long as they're not getting bossed and pushed out and stuff. So yeah, looks really good. So that's a really good series of photos of everyone looks really relaxed and calm, heads down. They don't look like they're hungry. They're not rushing, very relaxed, good contentment scores. So yeah, so just some of those, and it'll be a combination of selecting the ones that perform and also yeah, the grass and the land will increase as it goes. I just
Could
wanted to just finish something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you go.
I'm just going to, Spiky, were these the ones that we went to look at that day?
The first, Happy and Cheeky, the two heifers that might be in calf to one of our stags here, they were the next generation after the cows that we looked at.
Right.
And then the other 5 were just from down the road from you, but they're all bred by all the Murrays were bred by Morph, who so they're kind of all from the same
Gene pool.
Same people. They've come through different sellers, but yeah.
Right.
But those 2 heifers were out of that bull and from that farm that we went to.
Because there were 2 distinct types, weren't there? The little hippos, and then there was the leggier type. So that's interesting. Yeah.
But he only had 3 left, and we were going to take all 3, but he reckoned there was something wrong with the 3rd one, and he changed his mind and decided that he wouldn't sell it to us. It wasn't the right thing to do.
Sure.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously not an agent. Did I say that out loud? Like, so, on a recording?
I just had a question, Graham. I had someone else could just come and have a look at the foal the other day, and he had a look at the grass and he got all excited about how, well, A, there was green in it, but B, because of all the clover, that's great feed. And I remember you making a comment at some point about clover not necessarily being a great sign and it not necessarily being great for the cows. And I guess you just spoke to why it wasn't great for the cows, because it's high in nitrates.
Yeah, and too much of it. So a little's really good. So I usually typically say 5% is usually pretty good. But the great belief was that the clover was there to fix the nitrogen to grow the grass. And I used to stir them up at the DPI by saying, "Oh, so that was wrong, was it? Because now they're putting nitrogen fertilizer on the pastures everywhere." And I go, "Oh, because what I learned was, so I'd play the dummy, and it must have been wrong. I must have misunderstood it." So it really doesn't fix that much nitrogen, and a lot of them, when they dry off, don't leave any ground cover. Fibrous roots are better for the soil, and the soil doesn't care whether the nitrates and the ammonium come from bag nitrogen or legume nitrogen. We don't need too much of it, or else it'll leak out the bottom. So leak out as nitrates into the water tables and carcinogenic and all that. So we really need to limit that, because it stops the other pathway of the amino acids in the soil going directly through a fungal pathway straight into the grasses without bypassing mineralization. So Magali Wright put me onto this because she did a PhD on orchids, and they couldn't have lots of nitrate and ammonium in the soil. The orchids didn't like that. So she understood a lot of this. And I've studied up on it, and really in the arboreal forests, they've researched it. And then later on, they researched it in bushes and in grasses, that there's another pathway that bypasses mineralization, and it relies on the amino acids in the soil life rather than, the leaky mineralized nitrate and ammonium. So we're really it's better for the soil. You increase the pH back to 7 if it's acidic, and it decreases to 7 if you're alkaline. So it's all that. So a little's good, a lot's not better. We were managing for 40+% in Southwest Victoria was the recommended, and it was just too much.
5%.
The other thing I wanted to say is that when it's dry like this, you have to increase the stock density to keep their rumen stable and to get animal performance. So Johann Zeitzman's description of what can happen in these conditions is that the stock density is too high, but not high enough. And what he's trying to say is that if they're going well at the equivalent stock density of 1,000 cows per hectare on green grass, you might have to go up to 3,000 cows a hectare on dry grass to make sure that they're shandying the green underneath, that they're working and keeping their rumen stable. We tend to want to give them more area when the feed's not good, and we need to give them less area when the feed's not good. So it's one of those trial and errors. But if you move too quick, what happens is the rumen, they start skimming the green out of it. So you could imagine that photo with the clover and stuff. They'll eat that and none of the dry. And then their rumens, the bugs in their rumen shift. Sorry, I'll try and follow this more. So I think of in the rumen, I can't work out how to do this. In the rumen, you've got green bugs and dry bugs. And when they're going well on dry feed, you have a different population of bugs. if you give them access to green feed and let them select, it changes the population, and it changes very quickly from the dry bugs to the green bugs, and very slowly from the green bugs back to the dry bugs. So you're trying to keep their rumen stable. So it's really a bit of a trick on how to make sure that they're stable. And what happens is then they can't eat that feed because their bugs are in the wrong spot. So you see this really easily with horses, that they won't eat that. They just refuse to eat it. And it's not that they won't eat it, it's just that their bugs are in the wrong spot. So if they've had access to low fiber, high protein, high energy feed, and then you're trying to give them, say, mature native grasses, they won't be able to process them because their bugs are in the wrong spot. And it's the same with cows as well. So yeah, just some of those things. I feel like I'm dawdling. Yeah, well, I am. I just wanted, this is Marshall's. So that's moderate decomposition of the litter. So the slight is when it's going brown and starting to decompose. And when it's got this visible fungal attack, that's moderate decomposition. The nutrient cycling takes a step jump up. The water infiltration takes a step jump up. And he's got that now. He posted that last week, I think. Yeah, very recently, wasn't it? So late last week. Yeah, so that's what I think it's great, because he was on the ramps and things like that. And we've done workshops at Marshall's place and things like that. He's really got this and got it going well. Yeah, which is great. This was
It's a good one
to.
sorry. I was going to say, it's a good one to follow if you're on social media, Valleyfield Farm.
This was on the Regrarians, Darren Doherty's group that he does, and this is Francisco, and he just asked this question, what's this from? And everyone had a go. It was from a pipeline, it was from this, and it was actually where the travelling irrigator wore a bare path. So again, I'll just quickly do it. If you've got Forby, annual type weeds, thistles, cape weed, it's from recovery too short or bare ground and weakening the roots of the perennial grasses. And then that provides the conditions that favour the annuals and the forbs to germinate and establish. If you've got woody plants coming in, your briar rose, your blackberry, your trees, also woody wheat, coming in, then that's because your stock density is too low. And you'll see people that have got areas that they've got blackberry or something, but where they drive the motorbike or the ute, there is none, because there's enough soil to seed contact that they keep it as perennial grass. So in our environment, to keep it healthy, to keep it a healthy pasture and grassland without fertilizer and herbicides and all that sort of resowing and stuff, you've got to use the animals at high stock density with long recoveries and high utilization to keep it all ticking over. And you find out what that is through your safe to fail trials. I won't read this, but it's just out of Alan Savory's book about stock density and herd effect. And he was the first one that I believe came up with this whole thing that the animals at high stock density and starting to buffet one another and change their behavior is incredibly powerful at restoring grasslands. And I'll skip through it, but so you can read it at your leisure. But I just wanted to run through some photos. I sometimes think that people think that I've made up a lot of stuff, and it's really just to show you that this is happening all around the world. So this was out of that Great Plains video. This was at a savoury at Dibangombe in Zimbabwe. Sort of, they're grazing at high stock density and they use herders. This is out of Alan's book. So One Strand Portable Fence, I believe that was that's from Johann Zeitzman's herd when he first started doing it. The animals sort of jostling one another and mingling. This is from Justin Clark's Northern Tasmania. Matthew got in as well, which was good. So when been doing trials on that paddock. This is at Marshall's at Valleyfield at Glen Huon. This is from Celia's at Franklin up on the hill. This is sort of what I'm doing at Ben Warden in Eastern Victoria, another Eastern Victoria. This is Alex in Central Victoria. This is Caroline in Southwest Victoria. Another one from Southwest Victoria from Caroline's. This is Stephen Hobbs near Coniva. This is Peter Reynolds at Braidwood, Araluen in southern New South Wales. Another one of Peter. This is, I've forgotten his name, Rick
Coleman?
No.
No.
Oh, I didn't get it. I can't get it in my hand. I didn't keep it in my hand. Yeah, and he's sort of the New Zealanders have always been really, really good at stock density, not so good at recoveries. And I've always tried to get him to wind it out. This is another guy that's followed sort of my work and sent me a photo in South Island of New Zealand. I've lost his name, too many names. This is in the USA. This is at Gabe and Paul Brown's at North Dakota. Another one at North Dakota, grazing cover crops and mature cover crops. There's a real problem with cover crops, people grazing them when they're too young and they don't have enough carbon there to get, and lignified carbon to get enough material onto the soil surface so that it stays there. Most people are focusing on animal performance and the ground's bare when they take it out, whereas Gabe intuitively knows that he's got increased landscape function. It was very funny co-presenting with him in Victoria and New South Wales. So he said that in the New South Wales one, I answered a question. He said, Graham, you really are smarter than what you think you are, which everyone burst out laughing. So, I don't think he thought I was all that modest. So, but yeah, had a great time. Another one of Gabe Brown. Because they crop some of these areas as well, they really go for that temporary look. But that's sort of how we manage, but with the Kiwi tech rather than those speed ridey looking reels. This is from a guy that rang me, who's dead now, and I've forgotten his name, but Gabe sent me the photo of it. I'll get his name for next week. But he really pushed the boundaries on a lot of the stuff work in Canada. This is Jaime Elizondo on sort of not a great grass, but grazing it really heavily. Maybe not fully recovered when he's putting them in, but he does a great job. Subtropical temperatures on very sandy soil in Florida. This is in Mexico in the Chihuahuan Desert, and they're getting grass back now. This is again in the Chihuahuan Desert. Just that stock density sort of, they're really making sure that they germinate everything they can. And the hard part being, this is a Lini in central Brazil that Celia and I ran workshops for 3 days. Felt longer.
Felt like a month. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so hot. I'd have to go and have cold showers and stuff at Smoko and every chance I could get to sort of keep functioning. So she's really going well, changing the breeding. When we were there, we were trying to do a safe to fail trial and we couldn't keep the animals behind a single wire. And now she can keep animals at that stock density behind a single wire. And Celia I was doing grazing and Celia was doing women in agriculture. So South America, another one in South America, I've forgotten where that one is. Argentina, that's from Penza Grow. They have a fence lifter. So I'm not a big fan of sort of they're on lucerne and planted pastures, but yeah, it's really good stock density and really, I quite like the sort of automatic lifters and stuff like that. This is in Africa. I've forgotten whose this one is. We have to adjust that strip width, especially when the animals are new, to let everyone in. You can almost see that these animals aren't getting into the new strip. So tips, especially when we've got new animals, we'd make this a bit wider to get those in until they became part of the mob. Otherwise, they'll fall out really quickly. Like you can see this one is about a 1.5 score, sort of, you know, like not getting enough to eat. But yeah, it sort of takes a fair bit of management. And this is from memory. This one's
Bueno,
from
va entrando los niños. Segundo potrero del día.
It's quite loud. I've remembered.
¡Eh! ¡Venga, mis hijos!
And this was a farm that hadn't been grazed for 12 months. They keep saying they've got to do this really short recovery in the tropical areas, whereas that doesn't look too bad, does it? And the cows seem to be voting with their feet. They're running into it. So I think that, yeah, we've got to be careful that we don't believe things, and we need to do the safe to fail trials. So I thought this was pretty good. You know, they have a different relationship with their cows in Africa. And you know, there's always someone in Johan's group posting something like this either. The one I had last night was of the little boy drinking straight from the udder of the cow. So but yeah, that's sort of a different. How was that? Did that sort of give you an idea? Like it looks pretty much the same to me, that high stock density, moving them, trying to mimic that what you see in the Great Plains video. And what we find is that the land gets better if you focus on doing that to increase landscape function. So you're not just doing it because you can carry more animals, you're doing it to make sure you can increase landscape function, and that's what increases the resilience. So I'm friends with Gabe and Gabe Brown, and they've started their own verification for other people regenerating the land, and they've called the verification Regenified. So that's Gabe in the middle, Alan Williams here, and Doug Peterson. Celia and I have had a meeting with them, and it's just, I'll just skim through some of this. Jump in if I've put too many. They have a definition, but it's about the land. It needs people and money in it, I feel. It's a pretty good one though, and they know how to do it, you know, so there's always a big worry that I've got that people tell you why to do it, not how to do it. You really need people that tell you how. And I'd cull anyone that actually hasn't done it. So, you know, when did you do this? Show me the photos that you know what to do and that you've done it. If not, I'd book learnt and regurgitating stuff and repeating things. So they surveyed people. Shh. Your internet connection is unstable. There's 20% sales. It's growing by 20%. They're interested to try products from Regen, and they look for certifications when buying products. So I think it's really sound. They have a very good tiered system. It's not high enough for me. I'm a little bit my clock's wound too tight. I used to always say, you know, when I got back from visiting people, that their clock was wound too tight, until I was asked, well, have you ever thought about your clock? So yeah, I feel like my clock's wound too tight, but I have a problem that you can use the stamp if you're not continually improving, and it's for the majority of the property. So I don't think they should give the stamp until they get to like that tier 3 or tier 4. And I would define it as based on landscape function, where I know that they're still not eroding the land, they're getting good water infiltration and good nutrient cycle, just at that level. so I'm looking at developing a verification where you actually use landscape function as the stamp, and you've got to be over a certain bar. So you can say in conversion to regenerative, and then you are regenerative once you get to that level. So I'm saying there's got to be a bar somewhere. So I tend to be a bit tighter about all these things. They have their standard, their principles of soil health are sort of like landscape function. I'm not sure about this 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, but their ecosystem processes is from holistic management, and I was trained by Alan Savory, just checking the time, sorry. This is a friend of mine, Perennial Pastures in California. I work with them. They're part of this now. Perennial Pastures got 12,000 acres in Southern California that they're growing beef off for direct-to-consumer sales. And this is Gabe Brown's brand that Paul and his wife run. So they're making a difference and they're relying on premiums. I want to rely on providing advice that also makes the business better. So financial and safe to fail trials and all those things I do. This is where I was wanting to get to. This is that omega-6-3 ratio. So grain-fed beef is toxic and causes inflammation in the body because it's got this omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 6.5, whereas the ones that are coming off grass-fed, off high landscape function grasses are closer to wild salmon, which is about 1. Whereas they're getting that's an average, but they're getting very close. Like Gabe's and Paul's meat actually comes out the same as test for omega-6 to 3 as wild salmon. So I would never eat grass-fed. I would never know grain-fed. Sorry, I would never knowingly give it to my children because it causes inflammation and a whole heap of other things. This is the grass-fed average where they're using like a grass pellet as well as beans and lucerne and other things. So it dilutes that ratio. I worry about sort of all the Grays brands and things like that. Probably got to be careful when it's being recorded. But yeah, I would go for purely grass-fed and grass-finished, no grain, no lucerne, no peas, beans, or the grass pellet. They use like what they call a grass pellet to finish those animals. And the phytochemicals are much higher in the all the things that we need for health in our bodies in meat that's grown off high landscape functioning grasslands. So getting another beast process soon, and I want to send it away and get it tested for the omega-6-3 and phytochemicals as well. So that you can start using that to market the meat rather than having to sort of compete as just another person that's being pre-generative, because everyone claims they are, when it's clear even that they're not. They got good relationships. What they did, they started with whatever they're called, Mills, General Mills, and then they've started to work more with the brands and the Whole Foods and stuff like that. And then if you use it all regenified, you can use the stamp, or greater than 75% of the weight of the product is there. So and then the cost, that's the big issue. I'm saying we'll probably do landscape function every 5 years and get people to throw the dart, send photos in between the landscape function testing. So and verify with that. And I've been putting up photos for people. I didn't want to do it tonight, but you can actually go, if someone says they're a regenerative, you can go onto Google Earth or Google Maps and find their property and have a look. If you can see the ground, they're not. So on Landline this week, there was a farm up near Byron Bay that said that it was regenerative, and you can find it quick as anything on Google Maps, and you can see from Google Maps that it is not regenerative. Do you know? I'd do a combination of getting dart throws and photos from people compared to their safe to fail trials, as well as each 5 years doing a landscape function. Sorry, that's probably too much I've tried to stuff in there. I'll stop now. Any comments or questions, thoughts?
I've got one question.
Sure.
Sorry, Luke again.
Yeah.
At Grassroots, I think you showed an example of the strip grazing where you're sort of moving the fence and they're moving forward. But I
Yep.
think you said they had back access to the paddock. Is that correct? Or are you kind of, are you still blocking them off behind? Because otherwise, how do you get that recovery period? Can you just explain that, like the practicalities of moving the fences a little bit, and also water sources?
Yeah, so look, what we've done is it was a sheep property, a merino sheep property. And so it had very small water systems and stuff. They had a really good tank up on the highest point on a hill. They call it Mount Bengward, but it's a bit of a hill sort of type thing. It'd take you sort of 30 steps to get to the top of it, sort of. And that we've got a 2-inch line and an 1.5-inch line feeding down from there. And we've got a pretty good fall down onto the flats. And then it splits and goes in a 2-inch line and runs straight up the center of all the paddocks. And then we tee off that line with above ground or below ground pipe to take the water up and down the strips. We shift the water about once a day. If it's hot, we shift it more often. So we'll the water gets, so like we've just had that 3 days really hot in Victoria. So by about 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the pipe would be that hot that they wouldn't be able to drink the water. So we would empty the trough, empty the line until it had cold water and refill the trough. So this is a 200-litre green Polymaster trough, and we'd shift that. At different times, I go up to like a 600-litre poly trough or 1,000-litre, but they're buggers to shift. You know, I can lift a 200-litre into the back of the buggy and shift it easy. And then we just drag the water. The biggest problem, and it wasn't something that I'd even thought of, but the farms that I'd done this on before were never flat, you know. So I said to Jared, the owner, that is this where they come to calibrate spirit levels? Because you disconnect the pipe and water won't come out of it. So we'd always, like at Naringla, it's like that. At Southwest Victoria, it's more like northern Tasmania. There was always shape to the land and the water had run out. So then it's quite heavy to drag around and stuff. So we'd shift it typically once a day when it's really hot, a couple of times a day. And sometimes I just drag the pipe and shift the trough, like, 10 steps, just because where I've emptied it, don't want them pugging it up, and just to refresh it and cool it. But our corrective action, if they don't look very good, so if you think they look dry in the coat or they're not eating very well or whatever, is we shift the water. It's always the first thing that we found, so that you've eliminated that as a problem. It's refreshed it. If they haven't been drinking, they carry on as though there's been a beer strike, sort of, and they'll charge the trough. So but we don't shift it all the time, but like once a day we'd shift it up. And so we would back fence that shift of the big shift of the trough. We would typically back fence that, so they'll have maybe a whole day in that area. I've gone out, we found that it doesn't, what we're trying to do is eat the grass down more rather than less. So we don't worry if they go back and decide that they're going to eat a bit more of that. So we don't stress about that. So it won't start recovering until they're out of there. And so, you'd back fence it sort of, if they've eaten it well, or you want them to push into an area that they're reluctant to, we would back fence them in. But we back fence them to push them to eat more rather than stop them eating back, so eat more of where you want them to. So, yeah, whereas a lot of people are back fencing so that they leave their 50%. We're trying for 80% of the green standing material when in the growing season. So we have a different target, and we find that works really well. So, yeah. Was that okay, Luke?
Yeah, perfect.
Very good. You ready for a drink, Jordan?
My laptop just ran dead. I had a quick
right.
question.
Sure.
So I'm curious about grazing in non-brittle environments and whether the management is the same, because the savory methods are based on brittle environments, and how that, if the outcomes would be different. And yeah.
Yeah. So the way I've been summarizing that brittle, non-brittle for people is that in those seasonally humid environments, to complete the carbon cycle, birth, growth, death, decay, sort of that carbon cycle, you need the moisture and the bugs that are in the ruminants or in the guts of those grazing animals, whether they're hindgut fermenters or ruminants. So that doesn't heal that land. If you lock it up, it actually deteriorates, and it won't keep increasing in biodiversity. So that's brittle. Non-brittle is areas that are constantly humid, like a rainforest or lakes or oceans and things like that. So when people are complaining, oh, they locked up that area as a park, as a park in the ocean, I think it's a great thing. That always works. It doesn't always work with a national park on the land, because it depends how brittle it is. So you'd have to check what happens without grazing it and stuff. So what generally though, both those areas, it's the same thing. You're trying to increase landscape function. So a lot of our farming practices from Europe, which is relatively non-brittle, it's very hard to completely destroy those environments because they're always recovering. So in the UK, I said it was most areas, it was either warm and wet or cold and wet. It never was hot and dry or cold and dry like we get in New South Wales and stuff. So you same tools, but you apply them based on the outcome. So you put in your safe to fail trial, do that and see what happens. So everyone thinks that Australia has got areas that are non-brittle, and I say, if it's non-brittle, where you lock it up, it will only become better. It'll increase in biodiversity. There won't be weeds. It'll be full of life, and it's just getting better and better and better. There's very few places in Australia that are like that. So some of the rainforests, both the sclerophyll and the tropical rainforests, see, they keep saying around Byron Bay that it's non-brittle, but it's not behaving like it's non-brittle. It's not self-healing. Yeah.
Where I'm from is very similar to Byron Bay area in terms of the landscape. But
so if you lock it up, does it become like a healthy, thriving grassland or forest? Because it will depend on its distribution of rainfall and moisture and soils and stuff, on which one of those. But it will become a beautiful thing if it's non-brittle. And most of Australia doesn't become a beautiful thing if you lock it up. So some of them go okay for 10 years, but then start to deteriorate. Others fall apart very quickly. Out of Cobar, I've done a lot of work doing this, and within 1 to 2 years, it's starting to lose the perennials and fall apart. So it takes longer at Byron than it does at Cobar, but it's still, neither of them are completely self-healing, and then I say that it's a scale of 0 to 10. I say 5. Below 5, it self-heals. Above 5, it needs to be actively managed to heal. And people go, oh, we don't like 5. And I go, below 3, I don't care what the number is. We're making up stuff anyway. Just, is it tending that way to non-brittle, or is it tending that way? And then you do safe to fail trials and see what it needs. So very good. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? See you, Kirsten.
Yes.
Other
So, yeah. So what does that say about, like, on some of the Midlands properties where we hunt, you see these covenants that are locked up?
Yeah. So,
S-
so some of them will go okay, usually for a while. So it's quite brittle in those areas, quite seasonally humid. And what happens is that you'll tend to get gores, or in the wetter gullies or whatever, blackberry, you'll get weeds and things like that coming in generally. Not always, but a lot of those sort of areas, they were grasslands, those areas. We've all, the other belief we've got was that everywhere started as a forest and then we made it a grassland. Whereas, I always try and point out that one of the reasons we stood up was because there was grasslands. So otherwise we'd be still up in the trees, I think. So, so we were designed to hunt and run animals down in grasslands. Yeah, that was what our strength was. And we evolved to hunting grasslands. So I go, well, who produced the grasslands for us to be able to outstay, not outrun, but we can outstay and not overheat and stuff. So, yeah, so typically I find a lot of those Midlands properties can be good. If they've got a solid sort of kangaroo grass and being maintained and things like that, they'll be pretty good, Kirsten. But generally, a lot of them are falling apart, tendency to go weedy, bare ground. You can see the soil surface and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
A lot of gorse up there.
Yeah.
Mm.
I used to think Ballarat was the gorse capital of the world until I came down to Tasmania. So,
Yep, I think we've got it. Mm.
yes. You've
Yeah.
heard it before. Very good.
No, I've hunted
All
through
righty.
there too, Kirsten. Yeah. Well,
Right,
thank
that
you,
was
Greg.
okay. Any other questions? I'm happy. Comments?
Yep.
Send in any topics that you want on that sort of stuff, and we'll keep going on sort of how do you increase that, and then we'll start to feed a bit more monitoring through. I'm working on trying to get more photos of different levels of landscape function, and sort of trying to give those quick, easy things, the steps for the perennial grass basil area and stuff for people. So very good.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you,
That was
Graham.
okay.
Thank you, everybody. Yep.
And
Thanks,
same
Graham.
time next week. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
See you
See ya.
Friday.
See you, everyone.
See ya.
Bye-bye.